Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Conversations with Angela Wilder. Today, I have the pleasure of having Robert Egleston spend some time with us. And Robert has a really great story, and I'm just so happy that he's agreed to share it with me and with you. Robert, thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I think we met about 5 years ago, and it was a result of basically a cold call. And we've had a lot of conversations in between that time and now. I'm always interested in knowing why someone chooses Winston-Salem as their home. So what's the story for you?
Got lucky enough that after a couple of years after graduating from college, Reynolds called me, and I had interviewed with them out of Virginia Tech as an engineer. They called me up, and I came and interviewed. They were hiring more engineers, and so I got hired in 1981, and kind of thrilled because I'd gone to Wake Forest for a year before transferring to Virginia Tech, and so I was a big Wake Forest fan already, and so the thought of coming back here, the Wake notion was half of it. The other half was we were living in South Carolina, and this got us closer to Virginia, our home. But I would very quickly after getting here, it's like I would never live anywhere else. I mean, until my wife of 45 years and I have to move to make life easier for our kids.
Right.
We will make that move if they're in Charlotte or Raleigh or wherever, but otherwise I'm not leaving Winston-Salem. There's too much fun to be had here, too many awesome people.
Wow, that says a lot about Winston-Salem. When we met, you were at Datamax, and shortly thereafter you went to Leadership Winston-Salem. What is Leadership Winston-Salem?
It's a community leadership program that actually got brought here, or the idea came out of Birmingham when the new president of Wake Forest at the time came up and felt like that we needed a community leadership program. It's 36, 37 years old. I did it in 92, 93, and what it is, a cohort of people usually in the fall, like August to September start, and they spend one day a month together. And in doing so, you're with 50 other people, and your network gets turbocharged. You learn it's always from the very beginning, they wanted to have a diverse class, and they did. And they knew that that was kind of the key to making it work and hopefully to moving Winston-Salem forward. So after having done it in 1993, it was kind of a thrill to go and head up that little nonprofit in 2016.
Well, you mentioned diversity, and I know from my conversations with you that diversity is very important to you, and I know that this summer you did what I would call sort of a truth and reconciliation tour to Alabama. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I did. It's funny, I bought a book. I got really interested some years ago in the history of North Carolina. Now, I have North Carolina roots, but I grew up in Virginia, so I got what I refer to as whitewashed Virginia history. People in North Carolina got whitewashed North Carolina history. So I had a lot of roots in eastern North Carolina, and I didn't know much about what had happened after the Civil War. I've never really been a history buff. And now I don't care about the Civil War so much as the Reconstruction, the Jim Crow era, the 60s civil rights movement, all that sort of thing. And so one book I picked up, and I've kind of created a ridiculous library on that era, and one book I picked up was called The Civil Rights Tour. I opened it up, there's this big map, and it's everything from South Carolina to Mississippi and back to DC, and if you look, Alabama is almost like ground zero for that. And so I ended up deciding I wanted to go on a civil rights tour and really do Alabama. So I ended up asked a good friend of mine, Will Lewis, I'm a 65-year-old white man. He's a 50-year-old black guy. And we went for 5 days and just had the most wonderful experience. Made wonderful by the fact that we weren't just tourists, but I got lucky and stumbled into some guys that had grown up in Selma, Alabama, in Montgomery, Alabama, had done the Selma to Montgomery March, or in one case, his father was the first black attorney in Selma and represented Martin Luther King twice. So we hung out with guys that had lived it.
And you had living history.
Oh, we met an 81-year-old retired minister named Benny Tucker, who was just, I mean, I could have spent weeks with him just picking his brain. He was a young minister when the 65, all the things were happening in 1965. And his job was to protect Martin Luther King while he was in Selma and shield him if somebody tried to hurt him. And it was funny, Will Lewis, who was traveling with me, said, "Reverend Tucker, would you do that again today?" And he goes, "Oh, heck no." He said, "But I was 20-something years old. I didn't have good sense. I said, heck yeah, I'll take a bullet for him or whatever." And it's just, I mean, to talk to somebody that as a young adult was almost a contemporary, because Martin Luther King was awfully young at that age as well. So we were real, I mean, we got such, when you hang out with people and spend all day with somebody that was a part of it, even though they were young when they were part of it, you just feel differently. But
and it's interesting because we talk about the greatest generation. That is a part of the greatest generation that I think often does not get the attention that it deserves. To have been in the forefront of the civil rights movement like he was is something I think we need to, just like we don't want to forget our veterans that are dying every day, that living history, that's another piece of our living history that we really need to keep alive.
yeah, sadly, 10, 20 years from now, you wouldn't be able to do the same trip we did. You'd be able to go to the museums and see the incredible things we saw and walk the Edmund Pettus Bridge and that sort of thing. But sadly, Benny Tucker won't be around forever, and Jake Williams won't be around forever, and Terry Chestnut and the people we got to know. But you know, the thing that I came away with was one is the frustration that is strictly kind of secondhand because I'm a white male. I'm a straight white male. There is nothing that is in my way that has ever been an impediment in terms of discrimination. My gender, my race, and my sexuality. So, I mean, the road could not have been flatter or more paved for me. But these guys, this was in the 1960s that we learned a lot about the Freedom Riders. We learned a lot more about Rosa Parks and her effort on bus. And they were just trying to get the rights that had been given to them after the Civil War 100 years before. So Civil War ends, they get rights. Most of those get taken away after Reconstruction, Jim Crow laws. So 100 years later, they're fighting for the same damn rights that they had 100 years before. And now we're seeing in 2020, 2021, a reversal of some of those rights. And then these people, some of the things I learned about, Rosa Parks didn't break the law. She was sitting in the first row that was not reserved for whites. But it was customary that when whites filled up their rows, that they got the next row and the next row and the next row, and she said no. So she didn't break a law. Even though the police came and they arrested her, she broke no law. She just broke a tradition that they kept moving backwards.
And it's ironic because I know that you ran into one of my heroes while you were there, who my mother was just saying last night is involved in a case of a woman who did the exact same thing before Rosa Parks, and it is still on her record. And my hero and yours is working to have that removed from her record, her history.
And I think maybe in the last week or so that she might have been successful with it, or it's getting ready to be removed.
Yes.
But it really is. And Rosa Parks was kind of, it's interesting, we think of Rosa Parks as the very meek, mild seamstress. Turns out she was the local NAACP secretary. So she had been in meetings, she had been in all these things about nonviolence and all that kind of stuff in the training. So she really had a lot of depth to her and a lot of understanding of the cause and the movement. But so that's who they really thought they can, this person, we can take this to the highest level and get a decision.
It's kind of like Jackie Robinson. I mean, Jackie Robinson, there were a lot of great baseball players, black baseball players, and there were the Negro Leagues, but he was the one who could tolerate what it was going to take to break that color barrier. And she likewise, I think, was the one who was made for the job.
Could stand up to the pressure that was
Yes.
going to be on her because it was
Yes.
immense.
Yes. So it's just kind of switching gears here. Back here in Winston-Salem, and talking about Wake Forest, I know you have a program, Santa's Helper. So tell me a little bit about Santa's Helper.
I've always been a Wake Forest fan, was born and raised and kind of brainwashed to be a Wake Forest fan, even in Virginia, because I have my roots, North Carolina roots were tied to Wake Forest. And so always a big football fan. They had a program years ago called Deacon Parents. And so we kind of had gotten to know some football players through that program, and one was Chip Reeves, and he came to me after Christmas one year. He was maybe a junior at Wake. He was a fullback, starting fullback. And he said, Robert, I read an article in Parade magazine. I said, wait a minute, I saved that Parade. I saw the article. Hang on, let me go get it. I went and got it. A program called Elf Louise in San Antonio. And he said, I want to start something like this in Winston-Salem, but my idea is to have all the presents delivered by somebody dressed up in a Santa suit, because that way Santa isn't charity. Santa is supposed to bring kids gifts. And so we've been doing it for 36 years. Chip lives in Boston. He was actually here last week for the Duke game. And so he really is like a son to me. He started off as my quote-unquote deacon son and then became almost a surrogate son. But anyway, it's been wonderful. Chris Paul wore a Santa suit. Josh Howard wore a Santa suit. Tim Duncan went with us to a Brenner Children's Party for Santa's Helper. So,
What do you think it means to the children and the families that Santa's Helpers touch every year?
well, it's funny. I mean, we kind of track things. And so if we talk in total, now certainly some kids may have had Santa's Helper come to them several times when they're growing up. But we've raised more than $250,000. We've helped 25,000 children, although that's some of the same children again. We've always kept to families of 3 or more children, because we feel like if the parents have a tougher time if they got 3 children, 4 children, 5 children than if they just have one. And it's funny, I guess early on I would have thought it was important to the kids, and I think it is. But I've kind of migrated a little bit to realizing that it's important to the student athletes. James McPherson, a quarterback for Wake Forest about 15 years ago, and he's a San Diego Chargers scout. His hometown is a suburb of Phoenix. He has his own Santa's Helper program that he started there. Matt James, who was recently the Bachelor, wore a Santa suit all during his time at Wake, flew back from New York twice to put on a Santa suit. He's got a program in New York where he takes homeless and underprivileged kids on a culinary tour, kind of a world culinary tour where they go to different ethnic restaurants, learn about those cultures, learn about those foods, learn about eating in a nice restaurant. Don't know if Santa's Helper, his involvement in Santa's Helper had any influence on him deciding to do that, but
I would imagine
maybe
that
it
it did. Yes. When I lived in Los Angeles and I would go and feed people, I got more out of it than I ever gave anyone.
Yeah.
And I imagine that's the way it feels for Santa's Helpers.
yeah.
And then it becomes a way of living after they leave school.
And one story I love telling is that Chris Paul wore a Santa suit when he came as a freshman. And I had known Chris a little bit in his family because his older brother CJ and my son had played ball together, played Y-ball together. Not real basketball, just Y-ball. And Chris was kind of magical even then. He was like 6 years old and still was already, you could tell
Maybe he was one of Santa's elves instead of...
Well, and so he comes and he puts on a Santa suit. And so I went out, I was his delivery driver, and we went out with other athletes. And I kept going up to all the parents and I go, that's Chris Paul in the Santa suit. And Chris was already relatively well known in Winston. And so they were like, oh, that's cool. The next year he walks in to volunteer. And I said, Chris, you will not be wearing a Santa suit. And he said, why is that, Mr. Egleston? I said, because in Winston-Salem, Chris Paul is now more famous than Santa. So I said, you just go as Chris Paul, and that'll be so much fun for the recipient families. And we put a freshman that nobody knew in the Santa suit, because once you put on a Santa suit, you can't see anything but the eyes.
Right.
And you have to be told who's in the suit. So anyway, we had a wonderful time that time with, I still got pictures that I adore of being on that route and had more fun, and Chris being Chris.
Yeah, yes. So now you are the executive director of Twin City Foundation.
Twin City Development Foundation.
Twin City Development Foundation.
Used to be called the Datamax Foundation. When we met, I was at Datamax Corporation and Foundation. Luckily now, at age 65, I get a part-time job, but it's one that keeps me involved in the community and finding organizations that need support. Now, we're kind of limited. What we support is economic development and workforce development. But then we've been able to help the Urban League. We've been able to help, over the years, Experiment Self-Reliance, the food bank. You know, for instance, the food bank's culinary program is a job training program, so that's workforce development. And so we've helped them over the years, and looking forward to their brand new facility that's going to be out near Whitaker Park. So sometimes we can thread the needle, even if it doesn't appear. I mean, we've helped. We don't really do much in the arts, but we've helped the Theater Alliance, who is just about a block from where we are now, because they've got this new facility that was a cab company. They've transformed it amazingly, and they're going to have so many people downtown that'll be eating in restaurants and that sort of thing. So it really helps it's the economic development of that. So it's a thrill to go to lunch with people and go to breakfast with people and figure out if we can help them, and then try to get funding for their project.
I read in your LinkedIn profile that you never meet a person that you're interested in people, you're interested in their stories, and that is so clear. And you also seem to have this thread of philanthropy running through everything you do, every job you've been in, there's a connection to. So what is it that draws you think, to community and to helping other people?
The way I phrase it is I find almost everybody fascinating and almost everything fascinating. Read three newspapers every morning. I have subscriptions to 29 magazines. I counted the other day, but when I came to Winston-Salem, I came out of a small town, Waynesboro, Virginia, then lived in a small town in South Carolina, Lawrence. So I kind of got to Winston, and to me, this was a huge city. I mean, you lived in L.A.
But I grew up here.
True.
I grew up here.
But to me, this was a big city. This was multiples of any town I'd ever lived in. And so I kind of thought, well, it's not going to be practical to get involved in the community. Turns out that's not true. I got really involved in the Coliseum bond referendum in 1985. I got asked to be on a board for nonprofits. I started doing things. And I got to tell you that R.J. Reynolds, who I worked for from 81 to 99, fostered that. I mean, they allowed you to be working in the community, and if it took time away from your job, as long as you got your job done, they were supportive of that. They paid for my going to leadership Winston-Salem. They started a volunteer steering committee, and I was the first co-chair of that. And so Reynolds fostering that was a big thing. So that's what I've always been into, the notion that corporate culture, you will retain your employees longer if you support their working in the community. You will improve your own community if you do that. Philanthropically, it's fun now that Amy and I are able to donate more. I mean, what we used to donate $50, now we can donate a couple of hundred, or what we used to donate 100, we can donate 1,000 if we want. Because our kids are grown, they're out of our back pocket, we've lived in our house for 30 years, and so, you know, we lived for a long time where we had to think about every little donation we gave. And I am kind of a pure philanthropist, so if I were Bill Gates.
Yeah, if you were Bill Gates.
If I were
then.
I would have never been Bill Gates, because I'm not that aggressive in my profession. I mean, I wasn't trying to climb the ladder and that sort of thing. And I've been lucky in positions. When Reynolds eliminated my job in 1999, I didn't spend much time worrying about that, because I thought, you know what? I'd like to get a job in community relations. And I got a job like that at Lowe's Home Improvement, did that for 7.5 years, driving to Wilkesboro, driving to Mooresville. And then when I got to come back here and work for Datamax, they had created a foundation. So that's what really drew me. So it's fun giving away other people's money, but now it's kind of fun giving away more of my own money. And
what do you think the future of Winston-Salem looks like in terms of economic development and community development in the sense of inclusion and growth? What do you see for Winston-Salem, and what do you hope for Winston-Salem?
Well, this state, and specifically our community, literally, you know, if you go back, the industries that built the state and the community were tobacco, furniture, and textiles. And there was a Thomasville Furniture has major complex out here that's no longer in existence, although it's being used for other purposes. Haynes and other textile companies, R.J. Reynolds. So none of those, I mean, all of those are shadows of their former self. I mean, they're almost non-existent, relatively speaking. You know, we've got banking people here, we've got medical. I've said for 30 years, if it weren't for the medical Navant and Baptist, there wouldn't be any construction cranes in this town. What's amazing now is we're building apartments left and right. We can't seem to build those fast enough. We're sitting in Winston Starts, which is an entrepreneurial, part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I think Winston, sooner than some communities, started realizing that, okay, we're not going to be saved by Reynolds and Haynes and Piedmont Airlines and those kind of things. So we got to see where the new economy is going to be. And I do think we have a remarkable entrepreneurial ecosystem going with lots of nodes. I mean, there's Margaret Collins doing Center for Creative Economy, and there's Winston Starts and Flywheel, and the Enterprise Center down on Martin Luther King that Carol Davis has created. And we don't know, one of those may turn out to be a unicorn and we have $1 billion business here. And I think that Winston-Salem has got the kind of personal culture to it that people might stay here. I mean, we've had a lot of instances in the last, we lose companies to Charlotte, but we're getting people from Charlotte. The new head, executive VP of Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust came here from Charlotte. The new head of Goodwill came here from Charlotte. People that come here from Charlotte find out they really love Winston-Salem because they can get around.
Although I did hear some results of a study done out of Carolina, go Tar Heels, just the other day that demographically, North Carolina is getting older.
I would suspect.
It wasn't by much. It was a year and a half or so, but that portends not well for people coming here, having families, putting down roots. But I think that to reverse that trend, there has to be more of what you're talking about, more industries of the future and some more greater development in the future, not the past.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to know, and I hadn't seen those numbers, it'd be interesting to know if those numbers are driven by people that retired in North Carolina. Because, I mean, they retire and go to the mountains. They retire and go to the coast. They retire and go to Southern Pines to play golf. But it's interesting because, you know, 10 years ago, we had almost no downtown living in Winston-Salem.
Right.
And now we've got the Link apartments at Brookstown. We got the Link apartments at Biotech Place. We got a couple of hundred apartments about to be complete right behind the building we're in at 500 West 5th. And the huge complex down near Burke Street. And it's funny, even those of us that are involved in economic development, it's a little hard to know where these people are that are filling these apartments. But they're filling them quickly. It's a younger crowd. And so, and it amazes me. I mean, if you look at people's majors in college now, it's hilarious how many people are either majoring in entrepreneurship or they're minoring in entrepreneurship because they do not envision themselves working for somebody else for the next 40 years.
And those jobs really don't exist like they did 20, 30 years ago. So you said, I just want to know, do you believe in unicorns? You said
Unicorns with quotes, meaning some company that starts off with 2 people, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16, and then explodes. And so I'm hoping that we grow some unicorns here, and I think we've got a culture now that, and the support system around entrepreneurs. Now, when it comes to us solving the racial issues and the disparities that exist, I'm excited about Winston-Salem Rise, which is a Black-led 8 working groups. 50, they're going to try to populate each of those working groups with 50 people. I think that has some promise. Willard Bass's work on the Institute for Dismantling Racism. There's already a racial equity forum made up of 7 white men. But that's important because white men need to move along this continuum.
Right.
And I'm going to start another one.
Oh, great.
And it's probably not going to, I mean, I would like to have male and females in it, but it probably will be all white. Now, I've got all sorts of assets, you and Will Lewis and others, that I want to bring to the table. But for white people to move along this continuum, sometimes they have to be in the room with other white people
They
who
need to
have...
be spoon-fed
Yes.
first. Yes. So have you ever thought about political office?
I used to think about political. When I first moved here, when I lived in South Carolina, small town Lawrence, I thought, I'll run for city council. And then moved up here and I thought, oh, well, there's no way I'd ever run for city council. Then I thought, no, I could. I was getting involved in the community and I realized that we're just an overgrown small town. But then luckily my alderman stuck around so long that I got way over the notion. So now I just do that vicariously. My son is a Charlotte city councilman, so.
Yes.
And he wants to be Charlotte mayor, which I don't really wish on him.
Well,
but
everybody's got their path, and he may be the unicorn that can make a difference.
I wouldn't be on city council or be the mayor now if you just handed me the job. If you just gave it to me, I didn't even have to campaign for it. I mean, it's a bit of a hassle to be an elected official, and I appreciate the people that are willing to do it, or at least I appreciate some of the people that are willing to do it. I mean, I think I think it's gone nuts at the national level, which drifts down to
Well, it's moving through the ranks. Yes.
We used to say that all politics are local. And now all politics are national, and it comes down to the local level, and we're having the same silly fights and the same craziness at the local and state level that we're seeing at the national level.
Well, just like we talked about the fact that the jobs of the past aren't here anymore, now we have also this added social media presence, which is omnipresent. So what is national becomes local, just like you said. Well, I have to admit, I've kind of been looking at my city councilman's seat, but he's sticking around too, so I don't...
if you'll run, I'm on the campaign team.
Yeah, well, I was the governor of North Carolina Girls State back before there was such a thing as electric lights.
I did Boys State in Virginia.
It was one of the most amazing and transformative experiences of my life.
And so they elected you governor in Girls State.
I was the governor of
that's
Girls
so cool.
State. Yes.
I was just on the Supreme Court in Virginia. That was kind of like you ran for the offices and you didn't get them. They just threw you into it didn't mean much, but anyway, I did it in Lynchburg College. Where did y'all do Girls State here?
At UNCG.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
And was that American Legion? I'm trying to remember now.
Yes.
Are they even around still?
Yes, they are. They right on Miller Street.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, they are. Well, you and I could go on for hours and hours. Yes, yes. But for today, I just want to thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
And join us the next time for another conversation with someone from right here in Winston-Salem. I'm Angela Wilder. We'll see you then.